want to talk to you a little bit about how to write about your interviews. Sorry, I'm trying to get my microphone in a place where you can easily hear me, but they won't interfere with my typing. So let's say you have your interviews already done and you put them in your paper. Now, what do? The mistake a lot of students make is that as soon as they put their interviews in a table, they try to conclude and they finish before even talking about it. But that's not what we do. When we have interviews, showing the interview to our audience isn't enough. We have to talk about it. We have to discuss what we are seeing in the interview. So usually this is called a breakdown or an analysis. At the very least, it's called discussion, where we talk about, hey, here's what I've learned from the interview. Here's some interesting information from the interview. Here's how the information, if you want to get more complex and a little bit more critical in the discussion, you start to make comparisons and contrasts between what was said in the interview and what you believe or what your sources said. So I want to show you guys that right now. So, so let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen with you. And here is my essay that I've been working on. So the first thing you see is my introduction. And then right after my introduction, I'm talking about my connection to it, why I'm interested in this topic or this question. I put my question in here, right? We want to make sure our question is clear and visible in our intro. Right after the intro, we put our secondary sources. I kind of did a little introduction to the sources. And then I talk about my first source, and then I talk about my second source. I even have a paragraph where I'm talking about the differences between the sources and why I think those differences exist. And then I have my little, exigency paragraph where I'm talking about, like, hey, my sources did not, they were about Canada and Australia. It looks like they didn't talk about places like the Rio Grande Valley. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add something brand new with my research by doing what my two sources did not do, which is talk about the valley. I have a paragraph talking about why I chose interviews and observations. And then I have my interview in a nice table. Look how clean it is. It's easily readable. I have my questions on one side and her answers on the other. So, excuse me. So what do we do? Well, as soon as we're done with putting in our interview, right under the interview, that's where we're going to begin talking about it. So we're going to create a couple of paragraphs, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, where we explain what we discovered. So we'll have to, make sure you go over your interview, what they said. So I'm going to kind of quickly review my interview. What did she say? Okay. So what you can do is you can just kind of give a quick summary of the whole interview. You can pick out specific quotes. You can talk about, so I'm going to write down some things that I could summarize the whole interview and talk about it. I can pick out specific quotes from the interview and talk about them. I can do a combination of the two. I can talk about what surprised me. I can talk about what or how I relate to the interview answers or specific answers. I can talk about how my experience is different. I can compare and contrast to my secondary sources, or I can compare and contrast to my other interview or to my observations. I can compare and contrast to observations. Do you have to do all these things? No, you can pick and choose. You can do one or two or three or, all of them. Depends on what you want to talk about. I think I'm going to pick out maybe some specific quotes. I'll talk about what surprised me. I can talk about how I relate because I have some stuff that I want to talk about. And I might compare and contrast to my secondary sources. So I think I'm going to do those kinds of things. And I just like to plan it. So I'm going to say, so I'm going to quote her. So I'll start here. After my interview with Mrs. Herrera Erdem, with Mrs. Herrera I feel like that's not correct. It's too early. Herrera. Yeah. Herrera Erdem. I guess I'll call two birds with one stone. I'm going to pick quotes that surprised me. I was honestly surprised to discover that she takes notes. She claims, right? I like using the word claim. We're still using claim. I'll put in the quote there. No need for page numbers because there are no page numbers here. This is my interview. She claims she gets she says specifically her words are, I get really busy and she has to make an effort to really carve out her time to read and she takes notes. I'll talk about why this surprised me. I guess I assumed that professors didn't take notes and that note taking was just something students had to do to learn from their reading. To find out that even professionals take time to take notes gives me some important perspective about the importance of engaging with our readings. With our readings. And here I guess I can kind of connect it to myself. I talked about a specific quote. I talked about what surprised me. I'm going to talk about how I relate to this now. So I'm just picking out things that I want to do. I always find myself taking notes. Now, I won't promise you that I'm any good at it, but it's something I feel I have to do in order to fully understand what I'm reading. So that I'm relating to it. I'm going to compare and contrast what my interview says to my sources. So my sources were defining how reading is done. Feel packed, feel more work, practice good reading strategies, theoretical and practical knowledge. I think this here is an important one, right? What are the most important reading strategies and how they're applied? So I'll continue because that was also surprising. What for Mrs. Herrera Erdem also claimed that, and I can either kind of sum up her words or quote her directly. I like quoting directly. Let me read. I don't know what I'm looking for. Let's see. So I'm going to take her definition of reading. This definition of reading is an important want to understand. She claims that reading, that nursing students need to know how to read in a different way than other students, because they'll have to assess the reading and make decisions about whether they should apply it when on the job, apply what they learned when on the job. Sometimes what you read about is different from the situations you experience and requires different approaches. So I'm explaining there. This is different than how I'm not gonna say my sources, I'm gonna name them. Or my sources, Ingram, Bloomfield, and Maturin. This is different. Oop, I lost myself. This is different than how Ingram, Bloomfield, and Maturin define reading. For Maturin, reading requires imagination and relating to the reading. For Ingram, Bloomfield, reading requires critical thought, but it seems that Herrera Erdem really delves deeper into why that critical thought is important for nursing students. So there, I kind of talked about it. I could pull in some quotes if I wanted to from Ingram, Bloomfield, and Maturin. But I think I'm gonna leave it here. Maybe I might do that later. So I have a pretty nice discussion going on here. I have 2 paragraphs where I kind of compare. I talked about what was surprising, compared it to my own experience, and then kind of compared both my interview source to my 2 secondary sources and talked about how they're different. I guess I have to talk about why they're different. Yeah, I'll always talk about why. I think we see these differences not just because of the different spaces where they all work, but because they see nursing and learning very differently as well. Where Maturin sees learning as making sense of information, Ingram, Bloomfield, and Herrera Erdem see reading as something you'll eventually have to practice and make decisions about on the job. For Herrera Erdem, she cares about students making decisions about what they read, because as nurses, they will be making decisions that will impact a person's health and well-being, health and well-being, or even life. And there, I kind of discussed why I think why these differences exist. Pretty cool. So now I'm happy with that. If I was finished talking about my interviews, then I could conclude at this point? How does all of this answer my question? And what do I want my audience to do with this answer? But I'm not done yet. I also have an observation to talk about, or if I had another interview, I would also discuss that interview. But for now, I just want to show you guys how I write about my interviews, and I just kind of plan out what I want to say, and then do a little bit of writing. And again, we can compare and contrast to our sources, compare and contrast to our own experience, talk about what surprised us, talk about what we didn't expect, maybe pull out quotes to talk about from the interview, discuss and explain those quotes. Just think about how you want, what you want to talk about, and then organize it based on that. And there's no wrong way to do this. If it needs more development, then I'll go in there when I get it and give you some feedback about how you can talk a little bit more about it. So hope this was helpful, and I'll be doing another one in a bit about observations.